Hello, good evening. Welcome, everyone. So my name is Lucy Earle. I am Director of the Human Settlements Group at the International Institute for Environment and Development, which we can call IIED for short tonight. I'm really delighted to be welcoming you here in person and also our audience online to this IIED debate in partnership with the Mayor's Migration Council and with support from Bristol University's Migration Mobilities Research Institute and the Ashley Community and Housing, ACH. So why are we here? So IIED is a research and policy institute that works in partnerships with grassroots organizations all over the world. And we have particularly strong networks with federations of the urban poor in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And these partners of ours are increasingly recognizing that refugees, internally displaced people, IDPs, and vulnerable migrants are living in informal settlements in cities, places sometimes referred to as slums. And there are particular barriers to them achieving adequate standards of living and decent livelihoods. And we also know from global statistics that at least 60% of the world's refugees and probably more than half of IDPs are living in towns and cities, although those stats come with disclaimers that it's very hard to actually know where people are. But we believe that the majority of the world's displaced people are living in towns and cities, and we do know that most of those are in the global south. But the international community is not doing a great deal about the urbanization of displacement and of forced displacement. And there is a continued focus of attention, of policy and funding on camps. From our own research at IIED, we know that refugee and IDP camps are wasteful. They're wasteful of lives, they're wasteful of resources, and they have a negative environmental impact. And we've been working for many years with research partners, including Cardiff University, who are here tonight, and civil society organizations and universities in Jordan, Kenya, and Ethiopia. On these issues of urban displacement and looking at comparing situations in camps with urban areas. And we developed the idea of urban first as an approach to hosting of displaced people. And my colleague Alison Brown from Cardiff University will be talking about that later. And at IIED, we believe that towns and cities can provide more dignified, productive, and inclusive environments than camps for refugees and other displaced people. And we also believe that the role of mayors and other city officials is really critical in shaping that environment and making it positive and inclusive. And we're going to be hearing today from two very different cities, from Bristol in the UK and from Nairobi in Kenya, that have responded very proactively to refugee hosting. But we're also not here to romanticize the experience of urban refugees. And as you'll see from the film we're going to see and from Nairobi, life is really tough. At the same time, the refugees you'll hear from are determined to support themselves and their families in the city. They're not passive victims. They've made an active choice to go to the city. And this is a really critical choice in places like Nairobi. If you leave the camp in Kenya, one of the camps, you leave behind all humanitarian assistance. You're on your own in the city. So before we show the film, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists who are going to be sitting up here afterwards, who'll be having a discussion, and there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions as well. So we'll be hearing from Lord Marvin Rees. So Marvin will be familiar to you, many of you here in the room, as the former mayor of Bristol, and he was appointed a life peer in December 2024. So congratulations, Marvin. He's also co-chair of the Mayor's Migration Council, which is a platform that is working to bring the voices of cities and their leaders into international frameworks on migration and to channel funding and resources into cities. We'll also be hearing from Susan Kimani, joining online from Nairobi, where she is Assistant Director for Youth for Nairobi City County Government. She has worked in the Youth Affairs Department since 2016, and she's been really instrumental, actually, in championing the urban refugee inclusion agenda through her work with the International Rescue Committee, but more recently in the design of Nairobi's refugee integration and community building strategy. We'll be hearing from Alison Brown, who is Professor of Urban Planning and International Development at Cardiff University and Director of the Informality Research Observatory. She has led and co-led major research projects on displacement in informal economies and has published widely on these topics. So Alison and I worked together on a 4-year study called Protracted Displacement in an Urban World, and we're still friends, which is quite an achievement. And she and I guest edited the most recent issue of Environment and Urbanization, which is IIED's peer-reviewed journal. For those of you who are students in the audience, take a look. Much of our content is available free of charge. And you'll see a range of fantastic articles, most recently about forced displacement and the city in the issue that Alison and I edited. And I'm pleased to say that we're also going to be joined by two of the filmmakers who worked on the documentary you're going to see. Abdiwahid Kadir and Enoch Otieno are from Koch Films, which is a Nairobi-based community filmmaking collective. And they'll be online to answer questions after the film and panel discussion. And then finally, in this long list of intros, I'm delighted that Anne Singleton has joined us. To give us some reflections at the end and make some closing remarks, and is reader in migration policy and strategic policy lead for the Migration Mobilities Bristol Specialist Research Institute at the University of Bristol. So that was quite a mouthful. And she's collaborated closely with ACH on supporting migrant integration in Bristol. So just a couple of words about the film itself. It was generously funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council here in the UK and also the IKEA Foundation. And it documents the experiences and stories of refugees of different nationalities in Nairobi. And it used an ethnographic walking method to really capture the everyday experience of life in the city and relationships amongst refugees and their hosts. And the filmmakers themselves grew up in an informal settlement in Nairobi, and they're self-taught. And they recently won an award of merit at the Filmmakers Without Borders Festival. And just a quick warning that the film starts with some quite graphic imagery taken from media before it moves to the Nairobi context. So just a bit of a warning there. So the film is about half an hour long, just over, and then we'll invite out the panel and take questions afterwards. So thank you so much for coming again, and I hope you enjoy the film. So thanks everyone for again for coming to join us. And I'd like now to ask our panelists to come up and sit with me here on the stage. So Alison, Anne, and Marvin, please do come on up and take a microphone. And I'm hoping that we also have Susan online. And the filmmakers are also there with us, I'm hoping. And so there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. And there's also, for those who are online, you can put questions in the Q&A function as well. So is Susan there? She is? Okay, great. So I have a question, first question for our for Marvin here. So I understand that Bristol became a city of sanctuary in 2011, and that status has just been sort of reaccredited just quite recently, and is currently there's a consultation here in Bristol for people to sort of comment on what that could mean. Clearly, we also heard from from Jason and from Susan in Nairobi about how they're trying to make Nairobi a more welcoming place for refugees. I mean, clearly they're very different contexts. But there are also similarities amongst cities hosting refugees, similar struggles, I think. And I think one of those is to be able to show leadership and demonstrate leadership on an issue that's generally considered to be in the purview of a national government. And another issue that we heard about there as well, close to the ground, is avoiding a situation where longer-term residents feel resentment towards new arrivals. So I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about what you've done while you were Mayor of Bristol to help the city become more welcoming and inclusive for refugees and other displaced people. And then thinking about your role with the Mayor's Migration Council, a question about what more you think needs to be done globally to support other city leaders who want to take a similar stand.
Yeah, thanks. So that conversation around City of Sanctuary goes back quite a long way before the initial accreditation, actually. So I remember having conversations with the Bristol Legacy Commission, which was being chaired by Paul Stevenson back in 2006-07, when we had a pot of money to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the bill to abolish the Slave Trade Act, Wilberforce focused a year. And we put some money into developing City Sanctuary. Forward Masikwadzo was doing loads of work on that. It's from Zimbabwe. And actually, right from the beginning, when we talked about City of Sanctuary, we did explicitly mean people coming from outside the city and outside the country. But one of the things that we did talk about was the need for sanctuary for anyone, right? Sanctuary is about safety. So women fleeing domestic violence and abuse, children looking for a new start in life. So we wanted the the themes and the characteristics of a place that wanted to be a place of sanctuary to extend to be in the core of what we are. I mean, I had very little traction. I was just on the commission, but we said that. But what have we done? I mean, I can't account for what's going on now, and can't account for what went on after. But I think we did try and provide leadership. I remember in a full council meeting, and this was with my cabinet as well. One of the things that I said and have repeatedly said is, you cannot have the mayor that cares about children in Hartcliffe and the housing crisis and hungry children born in Bristol unless you have the mayor that cares about kids from all around the world. You can't distinguish between the two. And the point I made is, for even for receiving communities who might be seduced by the populists, there is no safety in the arms of a bully. You're one disaster away from being outside of their compassion or being on the receiving end of their ire, as well. So I think we made a stand, and that stand was also in terms of our leadership and our influence, or our message to national government, by being a very active participant in the Mayor's Migration Council. And I was a founding member of that, with the mayors of Freetown, Amman, Zurich, Montreal, Rio at the time, the mayors all from all around the world, making a clear statement about the role of cities in shaping national and international policy. And in fact, at the time, the Global Compact on Migration was being finalized at the United Nations. That was in 2018, I think it was. Caroline would correct me. And I went over to UN, and I spoke alongside Penny, who was the head of the International Office for Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York at the time. And we were the first two city leaders to speak into the Global Compact on Migration. And the point we were making is that the current global system not only is the lack of humanity and throws people into chaos, but at no point did they mention cities. And cities as the means by which we provide people moving around the world with a place to build their lives. And actually, off the back of that, we ended up with cities being explicitly mentioned. And then later that year, we hosted the Global Parliament of Mayors in Bristol. We had 100 mayors and their staff from all around the world at City Hall. US mayors, North American mayors, African mayors, Australia, European mayors. And one of the motions that we brought amongst that collection of mayors was a statement around our position on migration. And in fact, the papers don't cover it because they don't do good news. But one of the things that we did do was we had the Swiss ambassador to the United Nations here in Bristol, who was leading on that Global Compact on Migration. So we really got traction in there. The last thing I would say was a small thing, but is also a significant thing. Whenever we were told of new communities coming to Bristol, we did a welcome at City Hall. And one of my points was, look, I'm descended from Irish, Welsh, Jamaican migrants to the UK. I would share that story, and I would say, you're coming to Bristol, you're welcome here. You're part of our city, and you make us us, because we're a city, 180 countries of origin, and all the rest of it that we say. So we don't deny that tough things are going to happen, and we would say, look, there are going to be times when it's really tough to be here, but just so you know, as a start-off point, we are saying in City Hall today that you're welcome in our city.
Thank you. And just to go back to some of the work on the Mayor's Migration Council, and what more do we need to do to sort of raise the profile of other mayors who are standing up for refugees?
Oh, what do we need to do? Well, I mean, telling the story. I mean, I think so actually, I've just been on a text with Victoria today, and Caroline's in the room as well, who's now used to be our international officer at City Council, is now full-time with the Mayor's Migration Council. Victoria is the chief exec. I probably got her title wrong, but she's based over in New York. And we were just texting just now about talking to journalists. I won't say which one, because we've got to be very careful, because a number of mayors are coming in the firing line now, but how we support US mayors right now in particular, tell their story. But a number of US mayors are particularly concerned about whether they put their head above the parapet, because if they do, they could be on the end of financial targeting by Trump. But not only that, by the way, one of the other concerns is that they could then become under the threat of violence because of the tone as well. So there's very real considerations about who speaks and when. That's why some will speak and some won't, but people will speak, at some point down the line. So I think there is a politicians don't get to tell their own story very often, and I certainly experienced that. most people interact with the journalistic interpretation of the politician, right? And that can have all kind of race and class biases involved in that as well, which is a problem for the quality of our democratic system. But we got to just get proactive in telling our story. By the way, just the other thing I would just say, one of the things that we did raise with the Mayors Migration Council very early on is that when we're thinking about financial support for mayors around migration, it's not just about the financial support for integration programs and so forth, right? We have to do the work to invest in receiving communities, right? So housing, delivering affordable homes so communities are more resilient, able to cope with difference, making sure there's hope in people's lives in terms of job access. We got communities with 3, 4, 5 generations of poverty handed down, generation to generation. Their concerns are real, right? That doesn't mean that the world's most powerless people, least powerful people, are the cause of their ills. But when you have the world's left behind, told that they're fighting for scarce resource, that's a problem. And so within our cities, how we create conditions in which communities all over have hope, is the big challenge. One that's not easy to solve, but it's the challenge about building resilience into our communities so they can cope with change and be welcoming communities.
Thank you. And I think that point is very relevant to Nairobi as well, and the challenge of refugees, as you saw, living amongst in very poor quality housing in places that are underserved, surrounded by other people who are probably almost as poor, maybe not quite as vulnerable, but certainly their standards of living are not going to be that much higher. So I wanted to turn now to Susan, because it really is a sort of a global issue. Also, this one about the mayors being able to sort of stand up for refugees and perhaps sometimes sometimes in ways that are not totally following the line of the national government. I think you see that all over the world and in the US. And I think that's where mayors who are able to tell the story of refugees and who are able to, talk about promoting more inclusive environments can be very powerful. So I'm going to turn to Susan now. And it's lovely to see you live on screen. We've also just seen you in the film back in 2022 when you were interviewed. And you said that at that point in the city, there was recent recognition of the importance of an open door policy towards refugees. And I wondered if you could reflect on that interview then and share with us the journey from that point onwards to where NCCG is today. So just for some background for our audiences, I think unique to Kenya and possibly the wider region, Nairobi has a refugee integration strategy. And it's been approved by the cabinet and it's due to be signed and announced by the governor next month. And it's really a remarkable achievement. So please, Susan, tell us some more about how that has happened.
Well, I hope you can all hear me.
Yes,
well.
Loud and clear. Yes.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you all for inviting me here. Let me say that Nairobi has gone through a journey from a situation where it's a phenomenon that was the issue of the urban refugee issue was not a language that would have been spoken in the city, considering that the national government was fully in charge of, had the mandate to deal with the refugees. And so the city, the city county, or rather the devolved counties, did not have a mandate. And so we looked at a situation where 2021, there was a Refugee Act 2021 that allowed the counties to be able to give services to the refugees that were actually flowing into the city and who we are calling the urban refugees. And so looking at the population that was actually coming into the city, we had to look for a situation, or to look at how then the city was to start actually giving the services or the devolved functions that had been given by the national government to the county government, so that it can start also giving services fully to the urban citizens that were there then at 2021. So interpreting the act actually was the hardest, was actually a hurdle for the city to be able to deal with that, because there was a stigma in terms of even understanding how then do we deal with foreigners within the city? And so they did not, the county itself did not understand the language that was being spoken at the national government in terms of documentation, understanding the different documents that the refugees had, and which actually gave them the mandate to be within the city, or rather to be in the country. So we took it upon as a city or as a department. We started off with a few champions through IRC. We got few champions from different departments within the city to be able to speak, to understand the language. And so we went through a training where we could understand what it means to be a refugee, and who is a refugee and who is an urban refugee. So from there is when we began to through the champions within different departments. When I talk about departments, I'm talking about the different devolved functions that have been given to the city by the city, by the national government, to be able to deliver services to the city. So each and every county has its own mandate, and so the mandate of Nairobi had been actually is to give services to the city and not to register the refugees. So that is the sole mandate of the national government as it is up to now. But now the city has to look for ways in which to accommodate the influx of the urban refugees or the population that is coming on board. So I would say that we started a journey in 2021. And then 2022, during the interview, we were actually looking at how then we would be open to be able to speak a language that will whereby the refugees will be accommodated even in hospitals, being given the health services at the in the schools, and also looking at how then they would also be able to get into businesses, get licenses, and be able to be integrated in the city. So we began a journey that we had to sensitize the county assembly, where we sensitize the committee that is involved with culture and social services, so that they can also become champions within the assembly. As we go on together, we started a journey with the county assembly, and then we went on to sensitize the executive, where now the governor's office was sensitized in terms of the staff and those people giving services from the governor's office. And now we went on to deal with the whole county in terms of the staff who are actually giving services to the citizens, to be able to understand different documents, different people. So the sensitization is still going on. We are many within the county. We have quite a number of about 12,000 staff. So we have not yet gotten to a point of sensitizing all of them, but this is something that we are going to do. Again, we also went ahead and also did a sitting whereby we felt that we did not have a legal framework as a county to be able to give services to the refugees, and so the issue of the strategy came about, and so we formed a technical committee that was mandated by the governor so we were given a mandate to have a committee that involved them, the technical committee, that the county department, the NGOs, UNHCR, DRS, RLOs, and all that, and of course the representatives of the refugees within the city. So we mobilized, and we started off with the technical committee, and so we came up with a draft document, and this draft document that was which is a strategy that had main objectives was to promote social cohesion, and of course enhance economic opportunities and improve access to social services and cultural exchange and understanding, looking at appreciating the different cultures that have been brought about by the refugees within the city. Again, we also looked at different components that we will be able to be looking at. There are 7, and we are looking at the trade and enterprise, education, skills and training, healthcare and social services. We looked at community engagement and cultural exchanges, inclusive the development plans and policies, and of course, legal information and enforcement. These are the 7 components that we are actually looking at and we'll be working with in terms of the strategy. And so once the draft was done, we were able to, we started sensitizing the very groups that we started with, the assembly, understanding how the strategy is going to work, and who will be involved and how it's going to be implemented. Then again, we went through the different groups within the county. I would say that we had several participatory forums from the communities, and these communities were both host communities and the refugees. So they gave in their input in terms of just understanding the document and what it will take for the county to be able to interact with the refugees within the county. And the strategy is actually about just integrating and giving services to all, but also considering that the county had not had a budget which was inclusive. So we were now to look at how then do we include or where do we get the extra resources to be able to give services to the now weighing, the population that is weighing on the budget, the city budget. And so this has been discussed, and that is why we have actually come up with the document that will help the departments be able to intentionally come up with programs that will involve the refugees within the city. This is through the county integrated plans, which actually is a document that actually goes for 5 years, but it will go through review, whereby now we can review and see where the extra funding is going to come from. So in the meantime, it has been presented to the cabinet, and the cabinet has sat and discussed the document, and they have approved it. And so, as Lucy is saying, we are in the process of working on the launching of the document to be able to see then how then do we start the implementation through. We need the goodwill of the governor of the city to be able to implement through the city in terms of the systems. One of the why I talked about the open policies, when the county started understanding who the refugees are and how then they can be included, we made some changes within the systems. And one of the changes that which is positive for was to meet the economic enhancement, or rather the access to economic opportunities. For instance, giving access to markets that are within the city. Are we able to be able to intentionally come with a 30-70 ratio of giving allocating markets to the refugees? Again, looking at the system which had the licensing process, where the system could not accept or was not able to get to accept the alien ID card or number. But at the moment, as we are talking, we have been able to be able to bring in. We are now registering the refugees' businesses. The system is open. Through the collaboration of the Department of Refugee Services and the county, we're able to open up the system so that we accommodate the ID card, the refugee ID card. It's still a process because there are so many that have not gone through, have not actually gotten they are still with the letter of recognition or asylum. They're still at the asylum seekers, and they're not been able to get through the process. So it's still a process. We're looking at what documents can the county accommodate, and how fast can the Department of Refugee Services register, because there's a backlog of refugees that have not, or asylum seekers who have not been registered, or who have not been processed, so that they can go through the whole process. So I would say that to us that's a process, that's a plus. And again, also that it is also a self-implementing document, so that it's not really there are functions that we just have to do, like the health function. We still have to we do not need the mandate of the at the moment for the governor to tell us not to sign the document, so that we can start giving them services. Services are being given to the refugees through the alien ID card. And so we have actually gone to at that level, and in collaboration with different players on the ground, we are at the point of looking at how the implementation process will start in terms of fully integrating the refugees within the city. And I think so far, so good. We're hoping to do that in March. God willing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. I mean, it's really amazing to hear this. You've got the strategy, and now you're going to try and find ways to make sure it gets funding behind it, and that's important. I mean, if you're going to start opening up services to greater numbers of people, it does cost money. So and I think Susan and her colleagues are really determined that this plan is going to get implemented, and it's going to just become part of business as usual. So it's really fantastic to hear about it. I mean, I also really liked the way you talked about how the county didn't understand the language of refugees, and I think we've also found, as sort of urban researchers, there is a divide between people who think about cities and work with cities and people who work on refugee issues. For so many years, the refugees have really been apart. You know, they're in camps, they're in rural areas. They have been in urban areas for many decades, but it's only in the last sort of 10, 15 years that a lot attention has been paid to that. And there really is a difficulty of these groups of people talking to each other. I think Alison and I also found in our research in other cities like Addis Ababa, where we are trying to engage the municipal authorities, it was sort of unthought of that they could have responsibility for refugees. And so this was a long conversation among many, many actors, so that to start helping the municipality to see, well, these people are here, they're residents in your city, and they need services. So it's a journey in many parts of the world. So I'm going to turn now to Alison, who'll be able to pick up on many of the things that Susan talked about in terms of market spaces and business licenses. Alison's work has over her very long career has been on informal economies and informal work. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Alison and I were involved in a collaborative research project in 4 countries with people living in protracted displacement in cities. And she wrote about that in the recent special issue of Environment and Urbanization that I mentioned. And in that journal articles, more than one actually, that she contributed to, she talks about recognizing the importance of local government in responding to forced displacement. So thinking through the film and the discussion we've had so far, and that research, can you tell us a bit more about how cities can support the agency of refugees and their collective contributions, and what steps are needed to amplify their voices and help them achieve their rights?
Thank you, Lucy. And it's wonderful to see so many people here today. I just wanted to pick up on 2 or 3 things in the film which really struck home and which resonated with our own research. Anita from the Congo said, "I've got to hustle and use my brain. I don't want to be dependent on aid all the time." But particularly it was the challenges dealing with the police, dealing with people who didn't understand the documentation. How do you get over that? And you've also come from an environment where you've suffered violence and loss, and you're in this urban morass, living in very difficult situations. But there's a couple of other things that I also wanted to pick up on. I think Susan has been a fantastic champion. She saw from her work in community development that there was a need amongst refugees and that this was a community that was not being supported. But what she managed to do was to convince her directors, to convince other departments, even to convince Cardiff University to give her a small grant. That this was a community and that they needed to find a way to make this work through the bureaucratic processes that through which Nairobi County City Government, that's the city, it's called Nairobi County, operates. And that achievement of the Nairobi refugee inclusion and community integration process is absolutely critical. But Marvin also made another key point that most city governments don't have in their powers responsibility for refugees. So what's also been important in Kenya is working with the Department of Refugee Services, which is the national agency which has the powers to support refugees. And I think in both Bristol's case and in Nairobi's case, the importance of having a champion who's willing to speak up for this forgotten community is critical. But one of the reasons that Lucy and I have been campaigning for an urban first approach is because it enables humanitarian funds to be put together into longer term objectives with development funds to bridge the humanitarian development divide, so that host communities can benefit as well. So in our Urban First policy, which we talked about in the Environment and Urbanization special issue, the October one, in that in the editorial, we were brainstorming about how that would happen, and we are still friends, which is great. But we came up with a number of key principles, and I want to highlight 3 of those today, which I think help cities think about this way in which they can use, they can look specifically at their own communities, but deal with the regulatory problems and to attain the powers that enable them to help refugees. And to me, economic inclusion is a key issue. So although Kenya has quite recently passed legislation which makes it easier for refugees to be able to get rights to work and rights to open a business, this is fairly recent. And we found that a lot of refugees couldn't open their own businesses because they didn't have the right ID papers, or because they didn't have the right paperwork, or because it wasn't possible for them to open a business. So they went into partnership with the locals. Sometimes that partnership was productive. Sometimes it was very exploitative, and they were vulnerable to losing what they put in. And yet we know that migrants and diverse communities use their nous and use their skill and their diaspora links to be able to develop businesses and develop new ideas and bring new ideas to the sector. The second thing we wanted to argue for was recognizing the agency of refugees themselves. And while refugee representative groups are tolerated in some places, there's also a fear about insurrection and about a fear about difference. But refugee groups have to be able to cross over from just community support into advocacy, so that it makes it easier for local governments to work in partnership with them. We also talked about celebrating intercultural diversity, and in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, one of the humanitarian organizations on World Refugee Day celebrated an intercultural festival of food. So that's also something which brings people together. There are issues about co-creating data, because it's very difficult to find out who is a refugee and where they are, and communities themselves can often count much better and understand what those particular needs are to create data that can be used. And that's something which IIED does through much of its research. And also to identify those people who are vulnerable. But again, in Addis Ababa, the city council said to us, oh, well, we have women's services that can help refugees who've suffered from gender-based violence, and we can help the elderly, can help the vulnerable. Why can't we marry up these services? And we also, I think, need to improve access to registration and documentation. Sometimes it only happened in one locality in the city, and refugees couldn't afford to travel. But another aspect which we haven't talked, and from my background as an urban planner, I think, is adopting a spatial lens, doing things which are visible in particular localities. So UN Habitat advocates citywide profiling to know where refugees communities are and what their specific needs are. But we found also in Jordan, in Amman City Council, that city government was taking key spaces and looking at activities that could be co-created and co-designed between refugees and communities. And that supported integration, but it also supported that sense of ownership and belonging and integration. So there's so much that still needs to be done. We haven't, although the international communities are now talking more about an urban first approach, we haven't really evidenced what works where. And I think that's the next stage, to track what's happening in this pioneer project in Nairobi, to understand from cities that have been sanctuary cities where the threat is, and also to work in partnership in developing data and raising awareness amongst city council workers on the needs of refugees and IDPs.
Thank you, Alison. As ever, thought-provoking. Can I ask my colleague to come and grab a mic to rove around the room? And then it's now over to colleagues sorry, people in the room and online to come up with some questions. So I'll take, thank you so much. I'll take some questions from the room first. If anyone here would like to kick off with a question. We have one in the front row.
Hi, I've got a question for the filmmakers. I don't know if Abdi is one of the filmmakers.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, Abdi.
Hi, Abdi. Sorry, we haven't given you much time to speak yet. I've got a question directly for you, really. Is how did you manage the inclusion of the refugees who chose to be in the film or chose not to be in the film? And did they have a final say on the content of the film? And then I've got a secondary one, which is, did you choose to not include the host community, or was that, I don't know, did you choose that?
So Abdi, before you answer that, we'll just take another question in the room. I saw there was one here, and the lady in the white sweater. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the really interesting film and the great responses so far. I was wondering so Susan and I can't remember your name. I'm sorry, I'm really new to Bristol. On the issue of policing. So how do you manage from a sanctuary perspective? Like in the film, we also saw that one of the main issues that people were worried about was questions of ID and especially interaction with the police. So how do you manage especially these kind of questions? How do you manage the police, not rounding up people who are not, and deporting people who are not registered, for example? And I'm not exactly sure whether they would be under municipality or city government, or whether that would again be kind of this clash between national responsibilities and local government. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the question. Excellent one. So I'm going to give the mic to Abdi to answer that question about how the film was made with refugees. And then we do have other people involved in the film as well. So there's the question about hosts. You can also answer that one, or you can hand over to one of my colleagues who's also involved in the film.
Hi everyone, my name is Abdi. I'm an award-winning visual storyteller. So how we did the film was we included the refugees. First, we went to them and asked them if they'll like to tell their story, because our main aim at Koch Films is to change the narrative. We like to change the narrative of people who live in informal settlement, refugees, humanitarians, and I have experience working also in Dadaab, in Kakuma. So I had now to come and now bring the lens to the city to see how the refugees navigate the city, because as a person who's born and raised in the informal settlement and in Nairobi also, I navigate the city differently from a refugee who doesn't have documentation or who is new to the city, doesn't know where he will go for anything. So he might get robbed. So we went to them and then we asked them first if they would like to tell their stories. We had a lot of participants, but we only managed to, only 10 of them allowed to tell their story. They gave us the first consent first, how they want to be portrayed in their story, how we will capture their story. That was the first time. So we went and then we filmed them. The first day, it was research only. We recorded just audio, spending the whole day with them so that we get to feel how they navigate the city with them, so that when we come to shoot, we will know which questions we will ask them and where and which places do they avoid and the reasons why they avoid these places. So the second time we went with the cameras, now we followed them with the same route. Some shots also, we did some interviews also in the cars, but I don't think if most of them made it into the final edit. But we did that after the first edit, then we went back to them, each and every one of them, like the 10 of them. So we had to sit with each person with his story first, they had to watch and see how they were represented in the story and decide, now, I don't want this in this part. Can you cut out this in this part? And I want this part to be more, I want to be visual, or I don't want to be visible in the story. I just want people to see my audio, and I just listen to my audio and just my hands and the legs. I don't want anything else. But the others said they want to be seen, like they want to be very visible. So we did like the first consent, the second one with the film. And now I think there was one participant who wanted now with the second. It was like the third consent now with her. So we went with the film again with her. We rewatched, and then she decided she wants this and this and this parts. So that's like how the process took us. It took us over like 1.5 years, 2 years editing, because we had to go to them every now and then so that they will feel good. And when we brought the story to them, after we did like, now the first and the second consent was going to them with their own parts of the story. So when we did like the editing and added different parts of the city, most of them, after they watched the screening, they have like very positive feedback, and they told us now they wanted the part that they didn't want before to be now in the story. So we had now to sit again and decide now how can we re-edit after we have done the final story. So it was really interesting, and we had to work with them like for a whole day. We were working with one person from morning to evening to different places in the city to see how well they navigate. And in the story, you will see there was one Ade talking about like the city council is harassing them, and he is talking about that, and you are seeing them harassing people in the market. So we had to continue shooting and rolling, and when they realized like there's a camera, they decided to leave and run away. So I think changing the narrative is what like we do. And thank you so much. And I heard that the host community, why we didn't involve the host community, we were doing the story of, because the host community navigate the city differently from the urban refugees. So our lenses were only pointed at the refugees and the stakeholders, because most of the time, the government, the refugees have problem with the government because of access to documentation, police harassment, and how they navigate like the whole city, even dealing with the host community. Like they have issues with them. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Abdi. That great response. So I'd like to turn to Marvin now for some reflections on that question about the sort of police harassment and how does one deal with that issue?
We'll have to put a bit of context around it. I was just reflecting on how to answer it. Belonging is a series of concentric circles, right? And the context I would include is that I grew up in a city being told to go back to where I come from, right? And I'm mixed race, Jamaican father, but on my nan's side of the family go back in Bristol centuries. So how we relate, or may I say, Black and brown people relate to the institutions and how the institutions see them, and how we feel about it. And I don't, even now, I've been mayor of my city, I've just been given a peerage. You know, I mean, to be honest, I've talked to some African mayors and I've said, I need you to create the conditions in which I might have to flee to, because I don't know how welcome I'm going to be on these isles. And I feel that. That's not just a statement. I feel rejected, right? Because in the story of refugees and migrants, I feel that story sometimes more than often more than I feel the British story, right? Because my heart goes to the world's wretched, right? The left behind. But so there's a bit of context to it. So within that context, the relationship I would say about migrants and refugees with our institutions fits with that broader history of fracture and mistrust, right? And I'm just reading a book called We Were There, actually, just about the history of black people in Britain. And it goes back to the people that were fitted up by the police. We had the memorial to Paul Stevenson just last week, and Peter Courtier spoke. He used to do a lot of work on race in the city. He was talking, talking about setting up a defense fund for black people who took part in the rebellions back in the, in the day. Some people called them riots and so forth. And like I say, it fits within that context, right? But having said that, I think our approach to the institutional responses, and particularly the police, were these. One was an authority. There was some rumor pushed around by some self-proclaimed activists that the city council were cooperating with Home Office and all that. That allows activists to be what activists want to be. We weren't cooperating, and we said we wouldn't, and not certainly on my watch. There may be, not something that comes through my desk when the Home Office, like we thought, was going after people illegitimately. In terms of the police, we had a number of interactions with them over the years that was based around trying to push for and support good leadership. So I don't have control over them, but there's a police crime commissioner that's politically elected. And then we had chief constables. And I would actually say that I think that Andy Marsh, our previous chief constable, and the current chief constable, Sarah Crew, were two people we could work with, right, on the police's relationship with the city. And where we had a number of incidents that happened where we thought officers had acted out of line, myself and my deputy mayor, Asher Craig, were able to have police senior officers in my office. This isn't stuff that's in the papers and all that nonsense, and just look at the video and just frankly look at the evidence about how people were treated. And on occasions there was some embarrassment, but we always had a decent reaction. Even dealing with the Police Federation, who I find historically a problematic organization, but we were able to have some very frank conversations with them. If I just throw, just because it might interest you, I actually had a conversation with the mayor, a former US mayor, just a few months ago, by the way, when the election just happened. And when you think about that relationship between police enforcement and local leadership, one of the questions I asked him was, are we going to see a reversal of Little Rock in the United States? In that situation, the local politicians and enforcement were stopping black kids go to school, and as a federal forces got sent down to enable them to get into school. What we're facing in the potential of the United States right now is local law enforcement trying to almost protect their, and the mayors protect their communities, and federal forces being sent in to rob them of their rights. And he said, yeah, we are facing a reversal of Little Rock, right? And it's already happened at a low scale level, but we are facing the prospects of that now.
Thanks, Marvin. I'm going to turn now to Susan, to if she's able to give some remarks about how you deal with this issue around police harassment and the canjos of the municipal officers, the harassment of refugees. And you've got another question online, Susan. Just perhaps we're sort of running out of time, but if you can manage to do, I don't know, 2 questions in about half a minute. But the other question we have online is basically advice for other city leaders who how they can advocate to have the policies and the strategies in place that protect and integrate refugees into the urban fabric. So some advice from one city official to another who'd like to do something similar to you.
Thank you again, Lucy. I would want to maybe just to respond to the issue of the police, how we are dealing with it. Let me say that I said earlier we talked about the issue of sensitization and creation of awareness, especially concerning the refugees, and really educating the staff of the city county. We have champions within the security and compliance, and what they are doing is that within the city askaris, or what we call the city police or marshals, they are getting into sessions where they are being sensitized on this new story within the city, to understand that we have to treat the city refugees, or the urban refugees, or the refugees differently from the way we were working with them. Previously, is that because they did not understand about the document, is where what they would ask, who are you? They present a paper and they would say, what is this? This is not an ID. So what? I don't understand it. And immediately they're harassed and taken to to the cells. And I think at the moment is like we are changing, as Abdi is saying, we want to change the narrative by the fact that now the Askaris need to take some time and understand this document. So there is a process of sensitization, as I said. We are many, and so the sensitization is a process that is being taken slowly, step by step, starting from the commanders all the way down to the ones on the ground, so that they are able to deal with the refugees differently. I would say that this is part of what we're talking about, the pillars within the strategy. One of it is about capacity building, to understand that we need to capacity build the city staff to understand the more refugee issues than before. Again, I would say that this, on the second question, I think it's awesome. As a champion, I feel it's something that is deep in my heart to be able to tell someone or to change somebody's life by accepting them and being able to live with them and knowing the circumstances that they have come from. And so the city needs to, other cities need to be able to embrace, especially within Africa, to be able to embrace the situations that we are having, that it's not that we are all potential refugees in one way or another. And so I would like to advise them that it's something they can take up and run with, and it's quite fulfilling to be able to have a city that is cohesive and actually be able to see the beauty of the cultural, diversity that is within that city. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for those really inspiring words to end with. And I'm now, I'm sorry, we've slightly run over time. That's my fault for not being stricter, but I didn't want to stop our speakers in their flow because they've all got such unique contributions to make. But I'm now going to hand over to Anne for a few words of reflection. Anne from Migration Mobilities. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I hesitate to add any more comments because I think that all of those speakers spoke for themselves. What you said was wonderful. The importance of leadership at City, for Susan and Marvin explaining and showing that importance of leadership and working ethically and working in a proactive way to promote inclusion and integration and delivery of services in a way that's holistic for the whole community, for everyone. That's really powerful examples that we heard. And I'd just say on the question of monitoring the police, I was the chair of State Watch for a long time, and we monitor the police for over 34 years. It's still going, and the lessons that were learned through the GLC Police Committee are still more important than ever now. So holding the police accountable is very important to address those issues of institutionalised racism, structural and economic inequalities. And perhaps the last thing I would say, because some of my students are here and I'm so glad to see them, that the future leaders need to learn the importance of talking to each other, of learning from and leaders in all different areas of life, whether they be refugees, migrants, whether they be people who are of the more settled community, working together, that if you don't develop policies and practice using different voices, insights from the people who are the recipients of the policies, then the policies will never work. It needs to be something that is policy development and service delivery that is developed with an understanding of the needs of the people who are receiving them. That would be the whole community, the whole population. So I just think this has been such a wonderful evening for me. I've learned so much, so thank you very much.
So just thank you so much, Anne, for those words, and some other thank yous also to the Mayors Migration Council, to ACH, to Migration Mobilities Bristol for supporting this event, to the Nairobi City County Government and our partners in Kenya, SDI, and also, of course, Koch Film. So thank you so much, Abdi and Susan, for joining us from so far away. I know it's late in the evening there now, so I hope you have a restful rest of the evening. To everyone else here in the room, please join us in the bar for some drinks and to carry on the discussion. And to all our participants online, thank you again for being with us. And a very good evening.